Welcome everyone to today's event on investing in healthy soils. Healthy soils are the key assets of our farmers and agricultural systems. Investing in healthy soils is therefore an investment in the future. However, there's often a lack of specifically tailored financing options for a shift to sustainable agricultural practice that also preserves our soil and restores or improves their fertility. And this despite the fact that healthy soils can support climate change mitigation and adaptation, build resilience, and form the basis of healthy food. We want to discuss what is possible, what approaches and initiatives are already in place, and provide real answers as to what needs to be done by the relevant stakeholders to establish and implement new funding opportunities. Since soils have such diverse effects on the environment and societies, the topic in today's event has been close to my heart for a while now. So I'm excited and thankful to GFFA to provide us the stage, to all of you interested listeners, and to our experienced panelists to join this discussion. Please let us welcome Rolf Sommer, who is Director of the Department of Agriculture and Land Use Change at WWF in Germany. Before joining WWF, he was Principal Scientist at the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, or CIAT, in Nairobi, Kenya, developing and finding sustainable management solutions addressing the complexity of achieving food and nutritional security. The conservation of nature and agro-ecosystem functioning has been at the core of Rolf's work ever since. This includes protecting or rehabilitating soil health, improving the livelihoods of smallholders, nature and landscape protection, as well as carbon sequestration and climate change mitigation. Sigrid Griese is advisor for climate and sustainability at Bioland. She studied organic agriculture science and has been working in the Bioland Research Department since 2014 at the interface of accounting and agricultural practice, with a focus on the topic of sustainability analysis and climate protection and adaptation. In this role, she leads and works on projects that deal with the assessment of environmental performance in agriculture. Marlene Ahlberg is Deputy Head of the Division European Climate and Energy Policy, European Climate Initiative, Carbon Markets at BMUV, transitioning to the new Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. She has been working in the field of carbon market and carbon pricing for 15 years. In the division, she's responsible for the subject areas of carbon pricing and international market mechanisms. Jan Köpper is heading the Department of Impact, Transparency and Sustainability at GLS Bank Germany. In his role, Jan is responsible for the conceptualization, coordination, and implementation of societal impact management, as well as the integration of sustainability-related processes in internal bank management. Following posts at the Business Network CSR Europe in Brussels and sustainability rating agencies IMU-GVE in Hanover, he joined GLS Bank in April 2018 to start his current position. Rike Oliveira is Senior Global Technical Specialist in Nature Resource Management at IFAD. She's leading the knowledge work and project design, as well as the implementation support in key areas related to natural resource management. This includes strengthening local institutions for natural resource governance and management, vulnerability analysis, and building resilience capacities of rural households, and support for small-scale producers in transition to agroecology and sustainable food systems. My name is Jonas Echtner, and I'm advisor for agriculture and landscape financing at WWF. I'm responsible for our work with banks and deforestation-free and sustainability criteria, as well as developing sustainable business cases and bankable projects in the land use sector. with a focus on smallholder agriculture. My regional focus is Southeast Asia, where I coordinate a project in 6 countries. Previously, I've been working on responsible investment policy, sustainable land management, and rural development in Asia, Central and South America. Now let's start with some background information on the topic. Please let us all welcome Rolf Sommer from WWF for some opening remarks.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. First of all, thanks a lot for allowing me to be with you and to give you a little bit of a background. I actually look forward to this session. It's something that's been close to my heart and to my work for the past, say, 10 years or so. I will rush. I will only have a few minutes. I will rush through a few topics. If you haven't been into soil science or into soils at all, I just wanted to say that soils provide a multitude of what we could call ecosystem services or services. And I put a very nice screenshot. It's not mine, it's from FAO, that summarizes the various functions and services that soils provide. This is not a soil science lecture, so I can't go into all the details. Have a little bit of a look and familiarize a little bit with these different pieces. At the same time, we are losing soils at an alarming rate. I added here a screenshot from the Umweltbundesamt, the Federal Environment Agency of Germany, that gives us a clue about what we're talking about. And they were estimating that 10 million hectares of arable land worldwide are lost. The sad piece of this is a screenshot that is 7 years old. So it's not a new topic. We know that soils are under enormous pressure. That's why we need to invest in soils to revert this trend. We are talking about restoring soils, restoring soil health, but we are also at the start of the decade of ecosystem restoration, so where soils belong into. If you aren't yet convinced, or if you don't know what I'm talking about, or what the issue is, we always used to say that investing in soils and increasing soil health is a triple win. And I ranked here the 3 wins, and it's meant to be a ranking. We usually start with food security. Soil fertility means increasing the productivity. That means the production on a hectare piece of land. And hence food security. And this is extremely important in the global south. You may have heard the number of poor people, the number of hungry people is on the rise again. So that's the number one issue, number one reason for investing in soils, food security. The second one is, and we are quite lucky that we have this synergy between food security, soil health, and climate change resilience, because healthy soils also infiltrate water better, and they also store water better. So in terms of droughts, we have a certain amount of resilience that healthy soils can provide us. And the third piece, and that's the topic of today, is if we increase soil fertility, that usually means increasing soil organic matter. So the biological, the organic part of the soil, the humus, we say in German. And that, as carbon is the main building block of soil organic matter, that automatically means we are increasing the carbon content. And I put some figures on the right-hand side. What's often overlooked is that soils are a massive carbon sink of global importance. So soils, for example, store at least 2 to 3 times more carbon than what is right now in the entire atmosphere. There are a few hurdles to take, and I want to also put this in my introduction. First of all, sometimes, and that's also what I've been facing over the years, is their exaggerated expectations and the overestimating of benefits. It's correct. Soils are massive sea sinks, but all the estimates and all the numbers that I've seen tell us that this is only one of the many necessary mitigation efforts. So it's not the one and only solution that solves all our problems. We should also be aware that the food sector, the food system, in its whole, is a massive greenhouse gas emitter. The estimates are between 25 to 1/3 of the total amount of global amount of greenhouse gas emission comes from the entire food system. And if we look at CO2 alone, that's misleading because there's methane and nitrous oxide that is also a big piece of these emissions. We are at WWF are especially concerned with the reduction efforts that are supposed to happen with the Paris Agreement in all the other sectors. And I wanted to stress once again that if we talk about offsetting via certification schemes or certificates, we should not undermine mitigation efforts that take place elsewhere. We also see a risk of leakage and double claiming or even double counting. I'm not going to go into the details. We can discuss this later if you are interested to know. Then, ever since monitoring soil organic carbon is not actually cheap. So we may have a problem that the monitoring and evaluation costs are higher than what the financial benefits for farmers could be. So we need to think about some smart solutions to bypass this hurdle. Then there's the entire issue of the permanence of organic matter in the soils. Of course, you can build up organic matter, but you can also deplete organic matter. We also at WWF are very much into that to say that business as usual agricultural practice are not sufficient. This is not changing bits and pieces here and there. We are talking about a true transforming. And that agricultural transformation must not be a single dimension solution that would focus only on carbon. We don't want to turn farmers into carbon farmers. Food security is the number one issue, as I mentioned before. So in that sense, we must assure that management practice that increase carbon in soils are also good agricultural practice. And I guess this is a good introduction to our colleagues, Sigrid Ries from Bioland, where I'm very sure that this is also what's close to their heart. It's not only about carbon in soils. So investing in soil, what are the major questions that we should address now? So first of all, of course, what could be achieved in terms of climate change mitigation? What's the magnitude? What practices do we want to support? What is required to make this happen? Which means where to invest and how much, and which incentive mechanisms need to be implemented to make this all happen. And with that little introduction, I thank you all, and I wanted to also take the opportunity to show a little bit that we have WWF in Germany have a range of things we are working on soils on in education, social media, policy papers, and handbooks. This is just a little advertisement of our own work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roel, for this introduction. Sigrid, today we are talking about improving soil health and fertility. This needs to be implemented on farmland by farmers. What's your feeling regarding the farmers' perspective on the topic? And how can their initiatives be rewarded or incentivized?
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you, Rob, for the nice introduction and to give us a broader perspective on this topic. I think that's very important. Jonas, you're asking what's my experience with our farmers and how they experience the climate crisis. And I think something we see is that our farmers are directly affected by the climate crisis in their day-to-day life. So we have regions in Germany where farmers are under high pressure to adapt to specific changes in their region. And we also see that a majority of the farmers I'm working with, at least, are very aware of their role in mitigation these effects of the global climate crisis as well. So we have kind of this double situation going on. And I think in the context of the debate of healthy soils and how they can store carbon, it's important to emphasize that adaptation and mitigation have to go hand in hand, because I think that's the only way to ensure a really more sustainable and climate-friendly agriculture, which also produces healthy food, because I think that's the main aim of agriculture as well, right? And then regarding the topic of climate, my experience in lots of our projects and the works in our different working groups is that farmers want to know what changes, for example, in rainfall or heat they have to expect in the future, and also which measures are proven to show a positive effect in adaptation their farms and also contribute to mitigate to the climate crisis. And so there's a huge information need. And so we see that, first of all, they need valid practical information, because most farmers, they don't have the time to become experts in this quite broad and also quite dynamic field, if you look into it. And this is especially true for accounting methods and emission trading, because this is a really dynamic field, and farmers do, and I think most of us, not only farmers, are hearing different opinions and different new findings. And we see that one first step we have to do is that we have to agree on a set of criteria for a science-based but also practical system to enable a qualified decision-making for farmers and also other stakeholders which are involved in this process. But you are also asking about how to intensify these efforts. So I think I talked about like what are the needs, the basic needs in this process. And if you look into the system, into the farming system and the retailing system, then I think farmers need support to bridge this transformation process on their farms. Because as Rolf just said, it's not about implementing small measures. It's usually about really thinking about how to transform the farm towards a more climate-friendly system. And I think retailing systems which communicate and also financing their additional efforts can play a quite important role here, because this transformation process does need quite a bit of resources and time and also money then. But I think the support from these stakeholders needs to be a little bit more than that, because if you really think about transforming the farms, we also need to talk about different varieties of produce and also different qualities which are coming from the farm. And here we need also processors and retailers who are willing to buy these new varieties or different qualities and are more flexible here. Our experience is in general that these initiatives are very important, and they can show how it can be done, and they can also gain experience and be part of building an opinion and best practice. But they never reach the majority of our farmers. It's usually like small projects and quite small groups. So I think in order to really scale up these efforts, we also need a better political framework. And I think in this context, climate certificates have the potential to promote the work towards a more sustainable agriculture, but I don't think they can compensate for a really impactful common agriculture policy. So I think, no, I don't think we need, but I'm sure we need a CAP which includes payments for public goods and environmental services, and where all farmers, not only organic, but also conventional farmers, would receive payments proportional to their contribution to the protection of these natural resources. And if I'm talking about natural resources, it's not only about climate protection. We need also to ensure that other ecosystem services like biodiversity or water protection are supported as well.
Thank you, Sigrid. Marlin, Sigrid just touched up on the Common Agriculture Policy as one of the key policy tools within the EU for soils. What are, in your view, further important pillars of existing political frameworks to enhance healthy soils?
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting session today. And honestly, so far what speakers before me said, I agree to. From my point of view, I think for healthy soils, two main international agreements are important. First of all, of course, the 2030 Agenda and its sustainability development goals, as well as the Paris Agreement. And in regard to the Paris Agreement, there are two goals or two objectives that are relevant for healthy soils. First, the goal to increase the ability to adapt to adverse impact of climate change and not to threaten food production. And as well as second, the need to achieve a balance between emissions and removals by sinks of greenhouse gases to meet the long-term temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. And on EU level, to translate these goals into policy action, we have the Fit for 55 package that serves to implement the higher EU climate ambition for 2030. And this package, this policy package or legislative package, comprise 70 legislative proposals of the EU Commission, and it includes a broad mix of instruments in climate energy policy, and also including the revision of the land use and land use change and forestry regulation. So, and that is the one which will become or is already important for also for soil. Furthermore, the Commission has adopted in December 21 a communication on sustainable carbon cycles, which sets out short to medium-term action to support carbon farming and upscale the green business model to better award land manager for carbon sequestration and biodiversity protection. The goal is to enhance the natural sinks, which means soil, biomass, and wood production, and also the technical sinks, which is carbon capture and use and carbon capture and storage. So with this, the Commission intends to promote carbon farming practice under the Common Agriculture Policy and also under other EU programs. Furthermore, they want to develop a standardized MRV to provide a clear and reliable certification framework for carbon farming, allowing for developing a voluntary carbon market. And so there are examples for carbon farming afforestation and reforestation, agroforestry and restoration, revetting and conservation of peatlands and wetlands. So the next steps, what we will see is that this framework for certification of carbon removals will be developed, and the Commission intends to publish a legislative proposal in the third quarter of 2022. So it will be interesting how this will be developed in detail, but that is the state of play in regard to the legislative package, which is relevant for the soil. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlin, for breaking this down. So now let's talk about the financing part. Sigrid also mentioned risks. Jan, how is the changing perspective of the risk environment influencing GLS as a bank in your decision to finance agriculture? And do you have any financial products specifically addressing healthy and fertile soils?
Yeah, thanks, Jonas, and a very good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I think what is happening at the moment in the whole financial sector is a quite big shift in terms of the general risk perspective. This means that political decision makers, but also supervisory authorities, have come to understand that sustainability is basically systemically relevant and touches upon financial stability and economic stability. So their mandate is targeted by this clear understanding of how sustainability is affecting economic activities. And as a tip of the iceberg, if you wish, or the top of the iceberg, they have come to understand that climate change is maybe the most viral and maybe the most urgent issue that we are talking about. As a consequence, we have also managed to build up data and methods basically to measure climate change and climate risks. But in general, we are trying to differ between physical risks on the one hand, as Sigrid also mentioned, weather events, rainfall, etc., but also drought. And on the other hand, transitory risks, so adaptation risks that stem from regulatory developments or technical developments or changes of consumption patterns, for example. So the European Banking Authority, the European Central Bank, but also national supervisory authorities have asked the financial sector to integrate sustainability risks into their traditional risk management systems. This means that all sectors exposed to and dependent on ecosystem services need to be scrutinized specifically on their resilience towards these risks. And this is crazy because this also means that we need to deal with increasing uncertainties. We don't have the data. We are all, and many times, dealing with historic data to account for the future. But now we need to come up with forward-looking data that actually puts up scenarios of how certain pathways could develop. And this is interesting because it's a huge field of scientific work, basically. And this needs to be in line with the practitioners on the ground who needs to implement this. So how can we use scientific evidence and practitioner knowledge on the ground to put this together? But beyond just understanding risk, we also need to make sure that clients, specific agricultural clients, are in the capacity basically to adapt to climate change. And this means education. This means development of new accounting measures, such as true cost accounting. Or this also means support, not just lending or providing finance, but really supporting farmers in their pathway towards transforming their business activities. This also comes along with, and I just want to put this on the table, with another understanding of value, basically, not just putting forward financial capital and financial value as the core imperative of the system, but really trying to understand multi-capitals. And so really trying to understand the value of companies and their dependencies on things such as natural capital, human capital, intellectual capital, relationship capital. So all these capitals that make up the true value of a company and its interaction with society. Specifically in terms of products, you asked for that. We've just launched a credit program, with a very low interest rate to just make sure that we can support farmers in building up, for example, soil fertility, or making sure they can stick to their business model of organic farming, but specifically also targeting conventional farmers in their willingness, to switch to organic farming practices. But I want to make sure that this is very clear. It's not just about lending. We really need to make sure that we are partners of our farmer clients to really, dive into more details of what is to be expected of the future. How can we, make sure we are resilient to things that are coming up? And I think it needs more than just capital, because capital is just one instrument of the system, but it's about interactions, it's about knowledge, it's about co-working, co-creation. And I think this is what needed in the agricultural sector at the moment.
Thank you, Jan. And it's good to hear that there's already some mechanisms being built up and being implemented. But from your point of view, what needs to change for US GLS or for other banks to further invest in healthy soils?
For GLS, it's quite clear that we are financing basic human needs. So we are only financing those sectors that feed into basic human needs, such as renewable energy, organic farming, housing, social, education. So only human basic needs. And I think it's really core that we understand that this is the basis of our system, and we need to make sure the capital is provided there. But the barrier is that we don't have enough data to actually measure these risks. And farmers also rather, and luckily so, rather work on the field. They want to do something with their hands. They don't very much like the office work of part of it. So we need to make sure that we can support in collecting the data, understanding how we can evaluate risks, but also create opportunities for these farmers. So I think data availability and data interpretation is one of the barriers. But the other part is really understanding basic human needs, and that it's a societal task to, transform and help farmers as the core of all business activities, because agriculture is the predecessor of all forms of economic activities. And we need to understand that this is also a reflection of our soul as regards how are we dealing with agriculture, how are we dealing with farmers, because this really reflects how we deal with ourselves and our souls, and try to change the system around us.
Thank you, Jan. Rike, if we turn our attention to small-scale producers in the global south, what are their challenges in order to invest in healthy soils? And do you have some examples of how to best overcome these challenges?
Thank you, Jonas. Yes, I think to start with, it's important to mention that small-scale producers around the world produce around 1/3 of the food consumed globally. And they do that on only 1/10 of the agricultural land. So this goes to say that these farmers matters. Even though they are often poor and food insecure themselves, they do in fact get quite a lot out of the little land that they have. So they must be right there in the center as well when we talk about transforming our farming systems. So how to support them to invest in their soils? So one incentives, and that's a little bit the good and the sad, actually comes from climate change. Because they're under so much pressure, today it's a lot easier to convince Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Finance even, to take up loans from an institution like IFAD, of course these are very concessional loans, to invest in other types of farming practices, including the regenerative practices that create healthy soils. So it's a lot easier today than it was just 10 years ago. And this is because everybody understands something needs to be done differently. So there's this pressure coming from climate change itself because of the impacts. So it's a little bit, as I said, the good and the sad. So what else can we do? So there are many actions we can take, but I want to mention just 3 in this event. One thing we could look at is to move some of the incentives we now have through the subsidies for synthetic fertilizers and move them over to compensation schemes for the ecosystem services farmers generate, which is something Sigrid also talked about. It's not only carbon that she also mentioned, it's also all the benefits it creates in terms of better provision of water and also the flood risk control, and then we have the biodiversity. A study done by IFPRI in 2020 found that the subsidies of fertilizers to fertilizers in Egypt actually led to an over-application of fertilizers. So that was the nitrogen fertilizers, to be precise. So that actually means that these subsidy schemes, as they are today, sometimes also pour money down the drain. Of course, they support farmers, but when they lead to this over-fertilization, we are not doing good. And of course, these fertilizers end up in our water ecosystem and produce more harm. So there's a sound idea in trying to look at these schemes and maybe move some of the money. Another example is that India is planning just this year to spend like $20 billion on fertilizer subsidies. So if we could move just, let's say, imagine just 1/10 part of that to other kinds of schemes that could support farmers in regenerative soil practices, that could really create a different dynamic, I think. So this is one point. Look at where are the subsidies and what kind of incentives are they creating. The second point I want to mention, and that was also mentioned a little bit by the previous panelist, is the need for investing in advisory services that come from multiple actors. And that is nowadays including in particular the rural youth. How can they be part of providing better services when it comes to the knowledge that farmers need? Regenerative farming practices are knowledge intensive. There's a lot of good traditional practices and knowledge for soil conservation and fertility management among the small-scale producers, but sometimes they have gone lost in the promotion of the Green Revolution technology packages. And they also need to be complemented with knowledge from current research and integrated practices that can help them to adapt to these challenges of climate change I mentioned before. one example of how that can be done comes from one of the projects we have in Sudan. We have been investing in with the government of Sudan in the Butana region. This project expanded the community technical advisory services by involving youth from the villages as the first ones to be trained in soil conservation and fertility management. So even though these youths, they are not the landowners, and as such, they are not the farmers, but they are now the ones that continuing this support to their parents in adopting and further adapting the practices that they have learned. This includes support for their fathers who are working in the field crops farming of wheat and barley, and their mothers who are establishing vegetable gardens. So thinking about other ways of how do we expand the advisory service to farmers is very important, and involving youth as the change agents is really important. Then the third point I want to mention is create market outlets for a diversity of farm products. That's also quite important. So when we invest in strengthening small-scale producers' access to market, this is something we need to keep in mind. If we focus on supporting the strengthening of value chains with a high participation of small-scale producers for one product, we might actually create the wrong business case for increasing investment in healthy soils. Integrated soil fertility management and conservation practices use a diversity of crops, and they also use the practice of integration between crops and livestock, because that allows for the circulation of nutrients. So we need to think in multiple product value chains to incentivize these kinds of integrated farming systems. And as has been mentioned by the previous speakers, these systems are also providing really important benefits for providing a lot more diversity of the availability of healthy, nutritious food, and then, of course, the resilience part. So with that in mind, and coming back to the case in Butana, for example, there, when the communities came together and decided with the support from the project and also the local government to invest in a livestock market, so they could gather their cattle and attract traders instead of them walking long distances with the cattle to faraway markets. When they took that decision, they also decided to design these markets with stands for women to sell their vegetables and attract local traders for their products. So again, the multiple outputs coming from their whole integrity of their farming systems is quite important to think about. So these are just 2 examples of what can be done to strengthen small-scale producers' incentives and to support them investing in healthy soils. Thank you.
Thank you for those points, Rieke. And you actually answered already one of the questions from the floor, because our listeners have been very interested what's the role of youth in this transformation that we have ahead of us. So thank you for pointing out this already. How do you see the carbon market's contribution to getting more finance on smallholder fields? Do you think this is a big opportunity as well?
Thank you. So I think this has also been touched upon by the previous panelists, right? That carbon market is one of the tools we need for moving the mitigation agenda. But I also think we can say by now that it is really not the silver bullet. It has not created the emission cuts that we are also desperately looking for right now, and we need them. So carbon credits for small-scale producers and also rural communities more broadly is, of course, a good thing when the money starts to flow, and there are many good examples around the world. But actually, it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment to get to that point that the money starts to flow. The carbon market is generally quite hard for small-scale producers to tap into. So I think this is one thing to keep in mind. We are supporting these kind of initiatives and supporting small-scale producers to try to tap into this, but we actually see that there's much more potential in focusing on directly financing adaptation when it comes to small-scale producers. There's no doubt that adaptation is what they need, and designing mechanisms, including verification tools for channeling funding for good adaptation, would have a much needed and hopefully faster impact on small-scale producers. Luckily, most of these adaptation And resilience building practices, as has also been mentioned by the other speakers, in small-scale produced farming systems also create these carbon sinks in soils and vegetation cover, and as such they do contribute to mitigation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rike. And it's good to see an angel looking up on your shoulders at the moment as well. Huh? Marlin.
In Rome.
Marlin, you as carbon market expert, how do you see the link to carbon certificates? And where do we need to have a closer look to overcome the challenges around double accounting and offsetting activities that reduce the internal ambition of private sector actors?
Yes, I agree with Rike that carbon credits is not the silver bullet for a healthy soil, to finance healthy soil. With carbon certificates, it's a tool to finance mitigation in general, of course. However, carbon removal certificates faces more challenge to meet the quality standard of carbon markets. So there are some general quality requirements for credits. For instance, additionality, defining the baseline, leakage, sustainability, of course, permanence, avoidance of double counting, and the question of timing of generation of the credits. So I would focus on some of these requirements which are complex to fulfill for soil activities. Firstly, I would mention defining the baseline. For a carbon market, it is crucial that the currency of carbon market certificates is 1 ton CO2 equivalent. So it is really crucial that the baseline is robust and we can rely on that 1 ton is 1 ton. So that is one of the core requirement of a carbon market. And there it's the question, what is the state of science in regard to defining the baseline in regard to the respective activities? And there it's, according to my knowledge, it's different depending on what kind of activity. I know, for instance, for rewetting of peatland, there the science has already been advanced, but there are other activities where there is just an estimate how much carbon is removed from the atmosphere due to that activity. So that is one challenge. The second, of course, is the permanence question. And that is a general challenge for removal credits. In forestry project, for instance, they have found solution, buffer solution, in order to really make sure that if there is a loss of carbon removals, that this could be compensated. But activities like increasing the humus content and compensate with a buffer solution, this is the risk, or how to say, it's not, it's too weak really to be a carbon credit. And Rolf Sommer already mentioned the soil dialogue. They came up with a position paper on this topic, arguing against this kind of CO2 certificates as a contribution to climate protection due to non-permanence of these activities. Furthermore, the question of timing, when the certificates are issued. And there, for for implementing activities, it is important to see the financial flow quite early, so that they receive the money for implementing the activity. And in case of removals, the emission reduction takes place often years later. And in the carbon market, usually the emission reduction took place before the credit is issued. So that is completely different to the nature of the carbon market, how it's a function. However, there again, you can solve this with some safeguards. However, how can you be sure that this activity is in place also in 50 years? And that is quite challenging, I would say. So I would conclude, and yeah, you wanted me to talk about a double counting issue as well, and double claiming. I think that is one of the core requirement as well of carbon markets. And in this regard, it is possible to avoid a double counting, but also for oil, but that you head into the NDC of countries and how it is tracked and whether it's adjusted within the NDC accounting. But I think that is one issue which you could also set up a whole session to discuss this point. So therefore I keep this on the side, though that is one of my main topic at work. So to conclude, it depends on the type of activities, whether carbon credits is the right tool to finance healthy soil. And from my point of view, I would say that rewetting of peatland, that is probably a activity where you can issue with some safety requirements, credits, but probably not in case of removals in regard to humus content. That is, my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlin, for this. And there's a question from our listeners that I think perfectly links up to this topic. One of our listeners is asking, we are seeing problems in some regions that farms are being bought up by carbon offsetting initiatives to plant trees, and rural communities are being impacted as a consequence. What can we do about this? Is there someone who would like to specifically answer on this question?
Could you maybe rephrase it a bit, Jonas?
Sure. It's one of the common critiques of carbon farming, that we not only have the nexus of our land to produce crops for energy, but also for food. But now that this carbon farming is another topic that needs land, and that land is being bought. Rike, I see you raise your hand. Do you want to touch upon this topic?
Yeah, I think it is quite important, of course, that does not happen. And I think Rolf also said it, right, that carbon farming is maybe not where we want to go, only when we do have the land. So I think there we tap into the importance of land use planning and involving local people in the land use planning. And that then could link up to the governance of the land. So I think this is the key tool, and I think thinking about who is involved in deciding on how are we using our land is quite important, and what are all these other needs. And again, as has been mentioned by many panelists, there's many co-benefits between food security, providing integrated farming systems, and carbon. So let's go for those and not just do one thing without thinking about the others. But representation, participation in land use planning is very important to avoid that these things are happening.
Thanks, Rike. Sigrid, do you want to touch up on the point as well?
Right, yeah, I could add on that, and I said it in my input that we always have to think adaptation and mitigation hand in hand, because I think, and that's kind of the risk of the carbon market, that just the carbon farming becomes financially so interesting that the production of food becomes less interesting. And I think that's an interest conflict we should think about, and we should tackle in our systems for carbon farming. And I think that's why it's important that the measures which are implemented on the farms always should have an adaptation character as well. Because as Rike said, of course, we have kind of the task on our farms to also play a role and mitigate the climate crisis, but there's something even more urgent going on, and that's the adaptation issue. And that's, as Rike said, a food security topic. So in the long term, and in some regions, or in lots of regions in the world, adaptation already plays into the role of are we able to produce food anyway on the farms?
Rolf, can you say something on the topic as well from your experience?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I mentioned in my introduction that land restoration also comes into the picture here, because if we want to avoid these conflicts over land, or I should phrase it, we can avoid conflicts over land because we have, especially in the global south, in Africa, Asia, hundreds of millions of land that has been degraded to some extent and is hence less fertile, produces less crops, or is completely out of production. And I think that's where, as we are anyway addressing this, or we want to address it through the development goals and the decade of ecosystem restoration, that there's a unique opportunity to link all these aspects and say, okay, we are going into restoration. Restoration means we are also building up carbon in these ecosystems, and hence we avoid the conflict over food versus carbon sinks.
Thank you for this. And there's another question on the role of youth, or on strengthening youth. Jan, specifically for you, actually. What is the policy, or do you have any policy specifically to finance young farmers? And have you some actions to the African youth farmers? So maybe even specifically for the African continent?
Yeah, thanks so much. It fits perfectly because we have just finalized the program to finance educational programs for young farmers in organic farming practices. And this has been financed by our foundation, really to making sure that just young people are actually having the chance to dive into organic farming and understanding the attractiveness of working in farming. But this is just one part of the education. The other part is really experiencing. So we have learning journeys that we also offer, where you can just drive or spend some time at a farm, at an organic farm, and just learn for 1 week, what is happening over there. Dive into the theory, but also into the practices, and just really experiencing hands-on what it means to work in the farming sector. So I think these are two very interesting initiatives for young people to just really, taste it, smell it, feel it, and that's really cool to see what it does to the people. As regards the African continent, for GLS Bank, we are only working in the German regions, which is Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. But we have partners such as SECAM in Egypt. And SECAM, for example, is offering a lot of educational programs and also a lot of networking programs that are really interesting. So I can just incentivize to look for SECAM. It's really a great initiative. A lot of things are happening for the whole African continent at SECAM to really educate people over there in organic farming practices, basically.
Sounds very exciting. Thank you for this, Jan. So So we're actually coming to the end of this panel now. I would like to give everyone the chance, if you have a wish list, what needs to happen now to improve the fertility and of our soils and to increase our healthy soils. What 2 things need to happen within the next 2 to 3 years to really strengthen this transformation? Let's start with Rolf on the top left.
Sorry. Yeah, well, I think we've come quite far already in this panel, and we have seen certain recommendations from our colleagues here that I would certainly pick up. I really like the idea of Rike, which is actually not new, but involving the youth in these advisory services. We also have the same issue, by the way, and Sigrid, you can comment on that. In Germany, where we also are lacking experts that can advise on these nature conservation, biodiversity conservation, but at the same time also what are the suitable practices to sink carbon. So that advisory and involving the youth, I really like that, because also of the importance of, or the issue of unemployment of young people in developing countries. That's one thing. And the second thing is, maybe that we didn't stress it that much, but I really hope, from WWF perspective, that we are not seeing nature conservation and sustainable agriculture as enemies, but that we see, and we've seen it in many examples right now happening, that both are synergistic effects. We can do both, conserving nature and producing sufficient and healthy food for growing population.
Thank you, Rolf. Sigrid, what's your wish list?
Yes, I love the last statement from Rolf, and I think, as Rike said, that's kind of what the climate crisis pushed us into, that more people are seeing that it's evident that they need to have a more sustainable agriculture approach to really ensure food security. So I think this opposite of being a sustainable farmer and to being a highly productive farmer is getting less and less. And it's also because of the effects of the climate crisis. And I think that's not something I was hoping for. I think it's not the best situation, but I think on top of my wish list is a really impactful agriculture policy to really lift up the efforts of all farmers. And I think there's lots of potential there on each farms, be it a conventional farm, be it an organic farm, be it a small farm or a large farm. And the other thing on my wish list is that we have lots of partners in retail and processing who are innovative, who are willing to experiment with new forms in agriculture, new products, and really bring this change and transformation also to the consumers.
Thank you, Sigrid. And Jan, what's on your wish list?
It's quite a big wish list, so I needed to select now. I would say, in general, just to put it on the table, we need to fight food waste. It's a never-ending struggle to just, fight against food waste and also ease the price pressure on farmers as a consequence. Second one would be establishing true cost accounting measures to really make sure that those positive externalities that are contributed by organic farming practitioners also incentivized or provided subsidies to, for example. This also comes up with a gap, with a CAP, basically the Common Agricultural Policy, which definitely needs to subsidize organic farming practices. And finally, for the financial sector, we need to come to an integrated management perspective of multi-capitals. If we only prioritize financial capital, the system will stay as it is, but we need to understand the true value of a company and of business activities. This means nature, humans, law of intellect, all these things. We really need to come to a new understanding of value and honoring this.
Marlin, what's on your wish list?
Yes, I think I'm very much in line with Rolf. From my point of view, my wish list is that we should, carbon is one option, carbon credits as a financing tool, but there are so many other important benefits of healthy soils that also should, how to say, receive a value and to be also financed by as an attractive tool for the private sector. So that is one issue that is on my wish list. Secondly, I also what also have been said in this session, I think we should become a more broader, overarching view on how we want to use the nature and the soil, and in order to really to solve both the climate and the biodiversity crisis. So that is on my top list. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlin. Enrique?
Thank you, yeah, Jonas. I think on my wish list would be that we try to put the same effort we are putting into developing the financing mechanism through carbon markets to creating financing mechanism for adaptation. So we do have the Green Climate Fund and we have other funds in this world, but really, if you look at the fund flow that goes to adaptation for small-scale producers compared to what goes to mitigation, it's just a lot less, but the problem is big. So I think on my wish list is that the world, we think about that financing mechanism for adaptation, because unfortunately, before we turn the corner, we need a lot of adaptation to avoid that these figures we are seeing now with food insecurity going up keep being like that. We cannot live with that. So we do need to find these mechanisms to have a lot bigger fund flow going to adaptation for small-scale producers and safeguarding our food system for all. So that is one. And then I think the other one is a lot aligned also what Ralph is saying, that something we are looking at in EFAD as a finance institution, financing through loans, going to governments, is our economic financial analysis. So these are the analysis that calculates the internal rate of return and are these project designs that we put together with the government really creating the returns that they of course need to pay back the concessional loans. These economic financial analysis needs to be expanded with other kinds of, and to use Rolf's words, capitals, right? So we are also looking at how could we have a broader view of what we count into creating benefits, and also what we count into creating costs. Costs we kick down the road, so the externalities. So expanding these kind of tools, thinking differently, what values are we creating and for whom, and how do we count for that to make better investment decisions? That's also something that is on our wish list and something we're working on. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you especially for participating in today's panel. Thank you all listeners for listening to our discussions today. I hope we kickstarted some further discussions and further developments. After this, there will be a deep dive, I think directly after, for another half an hour, where all listeners can ask further questions, and we will try to get some more discussions rolling. So I just saw that the link to the deep dive has been posted now in the chat. So yeah, I hope some of you join us in the deep dive, and see you all in a little bit.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jonas.